period in which I, despite a long-term sentimental attachment to the old Republican Party of Barry Goldwater, a Republican Party that to me stood for small government, privacy, peace through strength, as opposed to a neocon vision of going around the world looking for trouble. A party of minimal taxation, a party of minimal regulation, a party that stayed out of the bedroom and out of the boardroom. Well, with the nomination of Mitt Romney, I began to believe that that party had been co-opted, that party no longer existed, that in fact, that party had morphed into an identical version of the other party, and that sadly, both parties had become the party of Wall Street, and the party of K Street, and the party of special interests, and the party of endless war, and the parties of erosion of our civil liberties, and massive debt and spending, trade deals that suck jobs out of the country. And now, as Scott mentioned, with the nomination and election of Donald Trump, I view that as the hostile takeover of the Republican Party by a new populist strain, in this case, of Republicanism. For those of you who don't know, I have been active in this movement for almost 30 years. I was marching with Reverend Al Sharpton and with Russell Simmons and with Andrew Cuomo and with Tom Golisano against New York State's draconian, racist drug laws 15 years ago. And therefore, I'm proud to be one of you. I'm proud to be an advocate. And yes, I was among those who advised then-candidate Trump to take the forthright position that he took, which is to say that he would support states' rights, that he would honor states' rights in the 29 states that have legalized some form of cannabis. I think that announcement was a key factor in his election. It was a key factor leading to a slightly greater percentage of younger voters, a slightly greater percentage of African American voters. I mean, the difference between Mitt Romney at 12% and Donald Trump at 16% is Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and the presidency. And now, incredibly, Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly are talking about a crackdown on legal cannabis. They're talking about undoing the famous Holder memo, in which the Obama administration did something that I strongly agreed with, which was to essentially stand down on the enforcement of federal laws pertaining to possession and distribution in the 29 states where cannabis is legal in some form. I think that was good public policy. But now, the Attorney General talks about a crackdown. Terrific story we saw the other day, in which the Attorney General went to the Congress to ask for approval for such a crackdown. And then I saw an interview perhaps 3 weeks ago in which the Homeland Security Secretary, Mr. Kelly, said, and I quote, "Marijuana is a gateway drug." What planet does this guy live on? By definition, if everyone who used marijuana moved on to much harder drugs, we would have millions of heroin addicts today. Where are they? This idea was discredited 20 years ago, yet you still see members of the administration spouting it. And towards that end, I am going to be working with a coalition of Republicans and Democrats, progressives and libertarians, liberals and conservatives, to persuade the president to keep his pledge, to remind the president and to remind the voters that the president took a strong and forthright position on this issue in the election. And in all honesty, it's time for him to tell Attorney General Jeff Sessions to cut the shit. I have elected to join with others, including John Morgan, the prominent advocate and Democratic Party activist in Florida, and Judge Andrew Napolitano, and my good friend Governor Jesse Ventura, Tyler Nixon, who is a great nephew of President Richard M. Nixon, who gave us the war on drugs, perhaps the most egregious mistake of his administration, second only perhaps to closing the gold window, and others in a bipartisan coalition that will have several purposes. One, to urge the president, as I said, to keep his pledge. Secondarily, President Trump could do what President Obama should have done on his way out the door and didn't. Change the schedule of marijuana from Schedule 1 so that doctors across the country can prescribe it for people who need it, who it could help. While we're at it, the federal bank regulators could lay off on banks who want to do business with a legitimate industry that is legalized and paying massive taxes in the states. And while we're at it, I'd like to remind the administration of the hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues that this industry, this legal industry, is generating. You reinforce federal laws against marijuana and you bankrupt the state of Colorado and the state of California and a handful of other states, and you bankrupt the counties. Governments are already counting on, they've already budgeted these funds for what is a perfectly legal and heavily regulated industry. So if you are interested in making America great again, if you're interested in a robust and vibrant economy, if you're interested in greater revenues to help solve public policy problems, if you are interested in creating jobs, well then you should be supporting the legal cannabis industry across the country. It's our intention to identify, reach, and mobilize millions of pro-cannabis voters to remind the president respectfully of his pledge and to urge him to keep it. Attorney General Jeff Sessions says, and I quote, "Good people don't use marijuana." No, Mr. Attorney General, sick people use marijuana, millions of them. And withholding medicine, withholding a prophylactic that helps people is bad public policy. Now, I would also have to tell you that I have been such a long-term supporter of cannabis rights that I am getting into the business myself. And with partners, I am farming a new strain of marijuana, and we're doing this with all of our California state permits in Yorba Linda, California. And the name of this strain is Tricky Dick. Now, some people say when you smoke this, you become paranoid and you want to go to a Chinese restaurant. That's actually not true. And we hope to have our first harvest this October. We do not yet have a distributor, so anybody who would have an interest can come see me or one of my associates. But it demonstrates two things. One, despite my longtime association and, yes, my affection and reference to a president who reached a nuclear arms limitation agreement with the Russians, opened the door to China, desegregated the public schools, desegregated the trade unions, saved Israel in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, gave us the Environmental Protection Agency, launched the war on cancer. Despite all those great accomplishments, the greatest mistake, as I said, by our 37th president was the war on drugs. So there is some irony. I can tell you that at the end of his life, when I spent a substantial amount of private time with the former president, and when I was able to show him the raw statistics on incarceration and a number of the other byproducts of the ignominious, expensive, racist, failed war on drugs, by the time of his death, I think the president acknowledged that the war on drugs was a failure. And now we have a bunch of drug warriors like Jeff Sessions, like John Kelly, like Chris Christie, who would like to be the drug czar, God forbid. They would like to reignite the war on drugs. We already incarcerate more people than any country in the world. We are rehabilitating no one. We've created a cottage industry in prisons, which employ all of these political cronies, shall we say. The taxpayers foot the bill. If anybody does get out, they come out a hardened criminal with no opportunity for employment or a future. It's time to realize that drug abuse is a public health issue, not a criminal issue. So in addition to urging the president to honor his pledge to support cannabis in the 29 states where it is legal, in addition to urging him to change the schedule in terms of the position in Schedule 1 so that doctors can prescribe cannabis, we're also going to urge the Trump administration to support additional federal funding at adequate levels for unbiased scientific research into the medicinal benefits and properties of cannabis. As I think most of you know, well-funded and large enough studies in Israel have already indicated incredible potential medical breakthroughs. It's time for us in the United States to have our own intensive studies and research to explore the incredible properties of this plant. And lastly, and perhaps this is the most important, in the event that we are unable to persuade the president to honor his pledge, and having known him 40 years, I can tell you several things. You can find this on the public record. He is himself a skeptic about the war on drugs, and he himself endorsed medical marijuana in the last election if he said that's what the people chose. And in many of these states that have legalized, as you know, that's not an easy process. In some places, you need 60% of the vote or more. You see, the process of legalization is controlled by Republicans and Democrats working together who like the status quo. And therefore, enormous credit must go to people like John Morgan. Sure, he had to try twice, but marijuana is legal in Florida today for medicinal purposes because of the courage of one man, because of the fortitude of one man, and that is my friend John Morgan. And therefore, there are John Morgans in every state, individuals, men and women, who have stepped forward to lead this fight. And my hat is off to you. But what happens if we are unable to persuade the president to honor his pledge? What if we are unable to persuade the president that the support of legal cannabis in 29 states is not only good public policy, it's also good politics? Well then, it's incumbent on us to build a coalition of liberal Democrats and libertarian-minded Republicans in the U.S. House and the Senate for the purposes of legalizing cannabis once and for all. We have the votes in the House today, folks. The dirty little secret is we probably have the votes in the lower body today. The votes probably exist in the House for a well-crafted legalization bill. The votes in the Senate would be tougher, but not impossible. So in my view, this is the fallback. This is the next stage of the fight. I intend to do everything I possibly can to persuade the president to keep his commitment to the millions of people who use cannabis for medical purposes and to those who are relying on state law for legalization of cannabis. And I have no illusions that there is a faction of the Republican Party that will oppose us. There is a faction of the Democratic Party that will oppose us. By the way, I've looked, I can't find Hillary Clinton ever coming out for legalization of cannabis. And this astounds me. I salute Bernie Sanders because he had the courage to say it. I salute Governor Gary Johnson and the nominee of the Libertarian Party, and Dr. Jill Stein, the nominee of the Green Party. They had the courage to say it. Donald Trump had the courage to stand up for legal marijuana on a states' rights basis to honor the decisions of the people in the states. Where was Hillary? Neither party has stepped forward on what is an important issue. That, well, sadly, that's just disappointing. But if it becomes necessary for us to legalize this in the Congress and urge the president to support it, we will be prepared to do that. Now, let me say lastly, and I'll be happy to take some questions, this has to be a bipartisan movement. I recognize that I have political disagreements with many in the crowd on other issues. We can disagree about anything you like. Immigration, trade, war. That's fine. You don't have to be disagreeable if you disagree. And more importantly, I think we can find common cause around this issue. No one party, no one ideology has all the answers. Only by working together with people with whom you have fundamental disagreement on other issues can we be successful. I have agreed to work with the United States Cannabis Coalition, which, as I indicate, is a nonprofit with an extremely narrow focus. There are many fine pro-cannabis organizations, the Marijuana Project, NORML, who have a broader agenda, and I salute them, and I support them, and I admire them. Our focus is more narrow. Persuade the president to keep his pledge, move marijuana from Schedule 1, get us more federal research, and then if we have to, go to the Congress. I'm very optimistic because the facts are on our side. In the states that have legalized cannabis, I don't need to tell you, opioid addiction is down, opioid deaths are down, petty crime is down, all forms of small crime are down. The exact opposite of what they told us would happen. And therefore, once again, it points out why this is good public policy for the Trump administration. They finish this by saying, quite simply, honoring states' rights on the question of legal marijuana, honoring the decisions of the 29 states that have legalized cannabis, is, in my opinion, a key point in making America great again. Thank you very much. As long as I keep my jacket off, I'll be happy to take a few questions. Yes, sir.
Yes. Have you had the opportunity to talk at any point with Attorney General Sessions or Secretary Kelly using some of the same statistics and data you presented to former President Nixon that seem to turn him around? Because, as you say, the facts of the statistics are on our side, and they've been there for a long time. Why is there still this reluctance and even aggressive pursuit of turning back the progress we made?
I think the answer to your question is the political influence of Big Pharma. In other words, there are those in the mainstream of both parties who cling to the false statistics and the rhetoric of the drug warriors. And in many cases, they have to know that our long-term experience proves that the war on drugs is a failure. So why don't they change their positions? Well, folks, Big Pharma is a major political contributor. Big Pharma is a major presence on. I'm not focusing the campaign I have in mind on Jeff Sessions. I think I might as well talk to this wall. I like Jeff Sessions. I must tell you, he comes from a Southern conservative tradition. I'd be willing to bet he's never smelled marijuana in his life. He has no idea what it's like. But he has heard since the time he was in school that just one puff will make you a heroin addict. See, it's a gateway drug. So you've got to cut through all of this disinformation. And frankly, the party leaders, they like the financial support of Big Pharma, because Big Pharma writes big checks. I think that is the answer. Another question. Yes, sir.
Yes, first of all, I respect and admire your stand on marching with such a diverse group of individuals against the draconian laws that have men languishing in jails right now.
Me too.
I think this would move forward a lot quicker if we had that moral fiber with this movement that you seem to represent, to say that the men who are currently incarcerated based on small transactions related to cannabis should have those records expunged and be able to either be free or have themselves positioned where they can vote and all the other things that have been taken away because of just little interactions are related to cannabis. Are you in a position to take a stand as strong as that, as strong as the other stands you've taken?
I could not agree with you more. The idea of incarcerating an entire generation of black men and women for the possession of small amounts of drugs, a non-violent crime, in many cases a first-time offense, and essentially destroying lives, makes no sense. In 1970, New York State passed these draconian, race-based drug laws because Nelson Rockefeller was running for his fourth term. He was up against substantial opposition, and the country was moving right. And Governor Rockefeller, who had been known as a liberal Republican, he needed to get some law and order credentials. So they gave us the New York State drug laws, which, while we have made progress, and while they are much better today, there has been no addressing of the question of those brothers and sisters who languish upstate in jails with no hope of a future. So yes, I would urge Governor Cuomo to use his pen. Let's start pardoning people. Let's start springing people. I'm not talking about drug kingpins who are selling heroin to school children here.
Not them.
We're talking about people who have made a mistake in life, perhaps, but who have been caught with a small amount of drugs, again, for personal use. So, yes, I'm in favor of greater use of the pardon process, greater use of the parole process. I think the governor has the authority to commute sentences. The upstate New York prisons are a cottage industry for both parties. When you go look at who works at these facilities, they're all related to somebody politically. So, yes, that is a reform we have to have.
I thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, so continuing on to that, this industry right now, and I agree, getting people out of jail is important, but this industry right now, as it stands, is not an inclusive and diverse industry. So Mr. Stone, what is your stance and what are you going to help us do to make sure that this industry is inclusive and diverse for all? So now the people that have been locked up for years also have an opportunity to make money in something that they were locked up for so many years ago.
I'm not sure I know the answer to your question, other than to say, first, perhaps we better make sure the industry is completely legal and protected. We have to protect the rights of the people in the 29 states. It's like, I have friends who wanted to argue about social issues. On both sides of, say, gay marriage, or both sides of this question. Well, if you are incinerated by a thermonuclear device, private property rights or gay marriage really won't matter. So I always think that there are antecedent war and peace issues that have to take some precedence. And that's why I can grudgingly excuse President Nixon, my mentor, for his egregious war on drugs, because I think his limitation of nuclear warheads with the Russians was a good thing, over the objection of his own Pentagon on my end, and of the deep state. So I'm not sure because I'm not in the industry, I'm in politics.
It starts with politics, helping this industry be shaped in the right way.
And I'm a small grower, but
so you're in the industry as well.
I'm open to other suggestions. I share your goal. I'm not sure I know enough about the industry to give you a better answer.
Thank you.
Sure. How about a lady? Do any ladies have questions? Anybody? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dr. Paul Jacobson, MD. They call me Dr. J. I'm a part-time child and adolescent psychiatrist for the last 30 years in Florida. I'm a full-time medical entrepreneur. As a recommending cannabis doctor, I've had to recuse myself because I'm also a vertically integrated licensee in Florida, thanks to the recent initiative in Florida. I am very much pro John Morgan's attitude towards getting this thing descheduled with the DEA. That's been a real problem. I see that economically this is killing our patient population because only those who have positive cash flow can afford the medicine. The medicinal value of cannabis is only for those who can afford it out of pocket. The insurance companies are waiting to get this thing descheduled so that the patients have a fighting chance at having the affordability covered. And I'd like to volunteer to be part of your preparation H team because I consider all this to be a headline in the ass of progress.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
Yes. What is your immediate plan to help this thing get descheduled?
Well, I guess the answer is to make certain that the president and key people in his administration understand the benefits. And as I said, not only persuade them that it's good public policy, but also that it's good politics. See, I think it's important to examine for the president who voted for this president. I've already seen a poll that shows that 1/3 of his voters would not vote for him again if he allows his administration to crack down on legal cannabis. Those kind of facts need to be better known in the administration. So it's an education process. You said in the campaign, it not only got you votes, it not only won you votes from people who cared about this issue, but they'll stick with you too if you stick with them. Keep faith with the voters that you assured you would support the industry and the availability of cannabis in the states. That's the key to victory. Now, whether we use direct mail, cable, or digital advertising, or broadcast television, or marches, or petitions, we're going to use all of those. We're going to use every modern campaign communications technique that we know works. We are in a different age in politics because it used to be true, whether you were a candidate or a cause, if you couldn't afford broadcast television advertising, always a multi-million-dollar endeavor, well, then you weren't even in the game. With the advent of the internet, we can reach the people we need to reach digitally at a much more effective cost. And therefore, the same exact techniques that I used to help elect the president, I would now like to use to persuade him to do the right thing. They tell me I have time for 2 more. Yes?
You're clearly pushing for medical rights. Do you think that you can push for adult use, and can't the state rights issue be used to move conservatives forward on adult use?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Go ahead.
If state rights is considered the conservative way to get cannabis through, can you use that also for the adult use argument for recreational use?
Well, first of all, I think those who think that you can segregate recreational in the 8 states that have it from medical, first of all, I'd point out that in most cases you have a different tax rate, and a higher tax rate for recreational. And from a strictly business point of view, if you were in the industry, would you not just shift your entire business over to the medical side? The taxpayers get screwed because the tax rate is lower. It's probably beneficial to the consumer. States' rights are states' rights. The process that legalizes medical marijuana is the exact same process that legalizes so-called recreational marijuana. And therefore, you cannot be for states' rights when it comes to transgendered bathrooms. You can't be for states' rights when it comes to gay marriage. You can't be for states' rights when it comes to abortion, and then say, oh, I'm not for states' rights when it comes to adult use. That's an inconsistency that seems to be lost on General Sessions. Perhaps we can educate it.
But you're up here today talking about only for the support of the 29 states.
Yes.
So you're not pushing for...
Well, the 29 states include the 8 states where it's recreational. I'm for legalization by the states on any basis that the state decides to legalize. If the administration somehow thinks that you can leave the medical industry alone and have a crackdown only on adult use for non-medicinal purposes, I don't think they understand the extent to which these are entwined in state law, and I'm not sure where they end up on an equal protection argument. In other words, this is about the legalization, or I should say, this is about the process of legalization. They're identical. So how would you say one is legitimate and another is illegitimate? States' rights are states' rights. You're either going to honor them or you're not. Put better, let the people decide. They've already decided. And therefore, if the people in California or Colorado want non-medical use, and they have approved that, and they're doing so at a higher tax rate, that's states' rights. That's what the people have chosen. That's exactly what I'm calling on the president to support.
Good.
Thank you. Quick question about the distinction between the legislative branch and the executive branch.
Yes.
And descheduling is all related. My understanding of the Controlled Substances Act is that the DEA's job is to hold an evidentiary hearing as the proper schedule for a psychoactive substance. The DEA has refused to hold an evidentiary hearing since 1988, and that's the meaning of the rejection of the rescheduled petition. What is your thought about the utility of focusing on a breakdown in the bureaucratic structure in which the executive branch agency refuses to consider evidence?
A good question. I would want to examine it a little further, but I would go so far as to say that I think, and if you have had the opportunity to see the Netflix documentary Get Me Roger Stone, I believe that you storm every gate. I believe that you attack at every opening. The NIH doesn't conduct studies that are significant enough, large enough, broad enough, well-funded enough to get to the truth. In fact, they just the opposite. They rig studies to try to show that cannabis has no effect. Well, I have an obvious question. If cannabis has no medical value, why does the federal government hold the patent on synthetic THC? So the answer is I'm open to it. I'm open to any front where we can make progress in terms of holding the federal government's and this administration's feet to the fire.
Will you take one last question?
Yes, I may. One last question.
Don't forget 2.5 minutes.
Yes.
So, this movement has brought cannabis. Michael, go to the mic. It's okay. So, this movement has brought legal cannabis to 29 states in the D.C. We have done this exclusively through the voter-initiated ballot measure process. It's a process we know very well. In New York, we have no such opportunity, simply not in the Constitution.
Yes.
But our Constitution has in it a clause that only 14 states have, and that's a requirement that periodically the voters vote on the question, do you want to have a state constitutional convention?
Yes.
It's coming up this November 7th.
Yes.
What's your position? Should we do that, or are we at risk from the outside groups like some of those that you are involved with of hijacking our convention?
I'm in favor of the convention, of the constitutional convention. The reason I am is because while the forces arrayed against us have more money, we have more people. And I have an inherent belief in the voters. I think the voters, when given all the information, almost invariably do the right thing. So I'm among those who is in favor of the Constitutional Convention in New York State simply because the state mechanism lacks a vehicle for legalization, which has been so successful in other states.
We're with you.
All right, great. Thank you.